Hello everyone. Well, in this particular chapter, we'll be discussing about the SQL injection or the blind SQL injection in depth. Well, what exactly is blind SQL injection and what is the difference between the blind SQL and the normal SQL injection? So, for the setup, we are using the same Windows 7 to host a virtual server, and in that we are running one vulnerable application, that is DVWA. And in the same manner, the attacker's machine will be the Kali Linux. We'll be using that. We'll be seeing certain specific tools. We can just automate the process of SQL injection and we can just fetch out the desired results. So the very first thing, we'll test it out manually, like how we can differentiate between the things. Okay, so first of all, we'll seeing up the things like how we can do the blind SQL manually. Okay, so in many of the web application, you must have seen that user can pass up certain parameters in any forms, like in a text box or in the form of certain boolean variables or something. Now the thing arises is, like whenever we are passing certain parameters to the web application, there must be the condition like the database should return either true or false, or if certain query or if certain string which we have passed is not in the proper syntax, so the database can return certain errors. So that is what the basic difference between the blind SQL injection and the normal SQL injection is. Here in blind SQL injection, the attacker will keep on trying certain queries, certain things to the database, and that should return certain boolean variables like either true or false or something like that. So to do that, we'll be passing certain submit request to the web application, and this will be responding us in the form of certain boolean variables. Now another thing, what might be the scenario in certain web application is either they can be vulnerable to this particular attack, but the other thing what can happen is, like if certain application is vulnerable, they must have prevented it using certain web application firewalls, or certain IDS or IPS have been configured in such a manner, like suppose an attacker performs 100 queries at a time, or suppose an attacker keeps on querying up certain database. So the things might happen is like they will start blocking up those requests. So once they started blocking up those requests, what we can do is we can use the time based injections. What happens in time based injection is, whenever we are passing certain queries, so there can be a pause between two requests. Now why we need such pause? See, because whenever certain legitimate user is browsing certain web application, so it is nothing like he will be continuously pinging up the database. But in the attacking scenario, we are continuously pinging up the database. So we need such type of pause so that the request which an attacker is sending should looks like the legitimate request. So these particular type of injection is known as the time based injections. So the very first thing we'll be seeing up, we'll be passing here certain queries and we'll be checking up either that particular column exists or not. So the very first query we'll be passing up is this one. We'll be checking up because as we are passing up the submit request, so we are using this particular parameter for that. And the next thing is we are just checking up whatever things are present inside that particular database. So once we submit this request, you can see that we'll get some information. You can see that the user ID exists in the database once we submit this particular request. So now in the similar manner we can just put up certain more queries, like we can order by, and we can even use the union and all those things. So we'll check with this, and then it's saying that okay, the database exists. If we check by 3, then it's saying that user ID is missing from database. So that is how we can manually check like what exactly the thing is behind the SQL database. So that's why this particular type of injection is known as the blind SQL injection. Okay, so now what we'll be doing is we'll be using a tool known as SQL Map, and we'll be trying to fetch out all the details of this particular database. Although you can find something like there must be the things which can be in the hashes forms, which cannot be reversed easily. So we'll try to brute force them also, and we'll see that how we can brute force them, and with the dictionary we will be trying to brute force them, and we'll be seeing that how we can get into the normal form of those hashes. So let's begin with this particular step. So the very first thing to get into the database, first of all we require the cookies and the session ID of this particular submit request. So to do that we'll be using a web proxy, that is Bubsuit. And by default this Bubsuit will be running on port number 8080. So we'll just create a temporary project in that. Here we'll be configuring the Bubsuit. It's running on localhost 127.0.0.1 and on port number 8080. So once we configure that, every request which is gone from this particular browser will go through our web proxy, and then we can easily intercept the cookies and the session IDs. So in the proxy we can see that the intercept is on. So now we'll try to submit the request. So once we click on submit the request, you can see that the web proxy started the intercepting the request. So let me just stop the web proxy from my browser. Okay, so we just require this particular data to move further. Now as soon as we get this data, what we'll be doing is we'll be using a tool known as SQL Map. So in SQL Map it will be supporting different switches, as you can see here. You can download this SQL Map if it is not there in your particular operating system from this particular site, that is sqlmap.org. Now we'll be using this SQL Map. So the very first thing we need to pass is the URL which we want to attack. So here we'll be passing that URL. So this is our URL which can be vulnerable. So I'll just paste it over here. Okay. Now the next thing, we need to pass the cookies. So in the cookie, we'll be passing this cookie and the session IDs. And now we'll check this particular link that it is vulnerable for SQL injection or not. Okay, so as we started this SQL map, you can see that it gave us certain information like the MySQL database, and it tried with the ID, get parameters and all those things. So the next thing we'll be checking up is the databases. So to do that, we'll be passing a switch that is -dbs. So once we fetch out the relevant databases from our database server, we'll be just selecting this dvwa as our database to be fetched out, and in that particular dvwa we'll be fetching out the tables. Okay, so now as you can see that it fetched out two tables for us, that is, one is the guest book and another one is the users. Now the next part is we'll be seeing what all columns are there inside those tables. So we'll be pretty much interested in users table. So to do that, what we'll be doing is we'll be going up with the dbwa database. In that, we'll be going up with the tables. And then we'll be selecting the table which is user, and after that in that user table we want to fetch out the column. Now it's asking us for providing the number of concurrent threads so that it can easily brute force the things. So as much higher the processor capacity is, you can provide the number of threads to it. So here I am providing 10. So as you can see that it is fetching out the number of items over here. So once it's fetched out the items, we'll see that what we'll get after extraction of these. So once the column have been fetched out, you will be seeing up this particular thing. These are the column and the type what that column is bearing. So now we are just interested in user and password column, and we'll try to fetch out the username and password from that particular database and from that particular table, and inside that table we are interested in these two columns. So to do that, now we'll be focusing on the column itself. -c, and we just want the user and the password to be dumped. Now it is asking us that do you want to crack the hashes which are temporarily stored, like some of the password can be in the hash format. So it's asking us that do you want to crack those particular hashes by using certain dictionary based attacks. So we'll say yes, and here we have the three options, like the default dictionary which we want to use, or we have some custom dictionary files, or we have some file within the list of the dictionary files. So we'll be going by default the dictionary list, and now it is asking us that do you want to use the common password suffix. We'll say yes. Now as you can see that it is brute forcing the particular hashes. Okay, so after it brute force, you can see that this is the table, that is the user and the password for that in the hash format, and besides that it is in the normal text. So that is how you can easily fetch out the username and passwords. And you can easily brute force the hashes also. So at the final step, what it will be doing is it is just writing the hashes into the temporary file, so that if we want to use in the future, we can just extract those hashes from this particular file. So well, that was all about the blind SQL injection and how it is working and how you can easily fetch out the data from the database. So I hope that all of you have enjoyed this particular video. Thank you. Thanks for watching.